The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the David Pakman Show. I am, of course, not David Pakman. I'm Benjamin Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Show. David is away on vacation, I believe, which is a well-deserved break from all of the political madness. There are a lot of things happening in the news. I want to start with Nike making Colin Kaepernick the face of their new ad. We'll pull the image up on your screen now. And on that, on this new ad, this says this: believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything, just do it. Now, as you can imagine, conservatives have already started to lose their mind. And before we revel in all of them burning their Nike apparel, let's get a few details about this deal. So apparently this is a superstar deal where he gets roughly $1 million or more a year plus royalties. And this is a significant deal because Nike has been supporting Colin Kaepernick since 2011, all the way through this process. Now, what makes this deal important and even bigger is that it places Colin Kaepernick in even more direct competition and confrontation with the NFL as well as President Trump. It's almost as if Nike is giving him an even larger platform than he already had. And by them supporting him, it really puts a bind on the NFL. Now, the situation with the NFL taking a knee and the potential collusion that took place between NFL owners to keep Colin Kaepernick out of off the football field has taken a turn. Last week, a judge ruled that the case could continue. And so now this is like 2 weeks in a row where there has been a lot of negative information, negative results for the NFL, and Colin Kaepernick appears to be winning in several different ways. That being the case, I want to read a quote here from the New York Times, and this is what they had to say about it. They said, quote, Nike will produce new Kaepernick apparel, including shoe and a T-shirt. And if the merchandise sells well, the value of the deal will rival those of other top NFL players, according to the people close to the negotiations who spoke on the conditions of anonymity because Nike had not formally announced it. Nike will also donate money to Kaepernick's, quote, Know Your Rights campaign. Now, this is an important factor in this. Anyone who knows anything about Nike understands Nike's history with sweatshops and child labor and unsavory business practices, both here in the United States, but particularly across the globe. And this is bringing a lot of attention to the reality of corporations co-opting movements, social movements, co-opting the radical voices that are speaking out against political and economic power. Ultimately, it's an example of what we on the left would say capitalism co-opting a movement. This is capitalism protecting itself. But underneath this, you have to take a note of what Colin Kaepernick is doing with his wealth. Colin Kaepernick has donated millions of dollars to activists locally who are fighting against police brutality, systemic injustices, et cetera, et cetera. And so Colin Kaepernick is taking this money from Nike as in addition to living his life, because, I mean, chances are we all had to be wondering how he's surviving. He's not getting a check anymore. He wasn't in the league long enough to be set up forever. Most players take a long time to get enough wealth to be able to walk away from the league. And many players don't ever make enough because of their spending habits. But the point is that Colin Kaepernick needed this. He needed this in this revenue, this income to survive. But in addition to survival, Kaepernick uses this money for good. So, I mean, there's a lot of conversations about whether or not we should be happy about this. I'm indifferent towards Nike. But what I will say is that I'm all for Colin Kaepernick using his wealth the way that he uses it, which is to, one, speak out against power, speak truth to power, and then to fund local activists who are actually on the ground doing the work. Now, something positive like this will not happen without conservative backlash. And I want to read you a couple of tweets from conservatives who lost their minds. The first one here on Twitter says this: "First, the NFL forces me to choose between my favorite sport and my country. I choose country. Then Nike forces me to choose between my favorite shoes and my country." So when did the American flag and the national anthem become offensive? Now, I wanted to read you that tweet from someone who seems to be just a random Twitter user because he shared video with it. Take a look at this video here.
I'm going to enjoy. Hell, I might buy some Adidas. You know how many other sneakers there are to buy, to choose from? You're going to go ahead and say, hey, buy them our shoes. We stand with people who kneel for the national anthem. Well, sorry, Nike. I've been buying you for the past 20 plus years. Not anymore. Not only am I burning my favorite pair of Nikes, you are burning your sales. Have a good day.
I mean, you know, it's ridiculous. People make these scenes, and obviously they're publicity stunts. They want attention, and so they burn their apparel. They did this when LeBron James left the Cleveland Cavaliers, and that trend never ended. But the reality of it is that Nike doesn't care about the handful of people. They've already made the calculation. This is a business decision for Nike. They have already calculated the cost, how much they're going to lose from conservatives who are mad, and how much will they make up in terms of people who are like, Nike's doing something good with all of the products from their sweatshops, so maybe I'll go and buy some shoes. And we'll talk about that later. But the point is that this is a business decision by Nike. And so they know full well exactly about how many people they're going to lose. They know their demographic. They know their target demographic. They understand that they're going to lose X amount of dollars, but they're going to make up so much more, or else they would not have done this deal. I don't believe that Nike is doing anything out of the goodness of their heart. Let's dispense with that notion. Nike is not sacrificing anything in this deal. Nike is going to make money with this deal, and that's the point. The other point, obviously, is that Colin Kaepernick is going to make money with this deal, and he has demonstrated that he's going to continue to do good with the money that he makes. So, while conservatives are losing their mind, burning all of their apparel, the reality of it is Nike doesn't really care. But I want to read this from conservatives' favorite Black conservative voice these days, Candace Owens, on Twitter. This is what she had to say. She said, quote, "Congratulations to Adidas for a wonderful win in business today. They are proof that sometimes all you have to do is sit back and let your competitors shoot themselves in the foot. Hashtag 3Stripe Life at Adidas USA, and at Adidas _UK. No underscore there. Yeah, okay. If you say so. The only reason I read that, besides the silliness of it, is that, in my effort to find a conflict-free sneaker, Adidas was listed there. But Adidas was listed there as a more eco-friendly sneaker. And as I researched it, Adidas is there. And I know this is not Candace's perspective. I don't really care about her perspective, but just Adidas in general, and in my efforts to find conflict-free shoes that pay a living wage, there literally are no popular shoes on the market today that pay their workers a livable wage, including Adidas. But Adidas is listed as a more eco-friendly shoe. That was something fascinating that I saw this morning. So a lot of people, most of us in the United States, we are consumers of conflict goods. It's just what it is. And so, while people are lamenting this deal with Nike, and, where are you going to go? I guarantee you, most of you have Nike in your closets or in your jogging apparel or whatnot. But one more, of course, it would not be a complete day without Ben Shapiro chiming in. And this is what he had to say with regard to Colin Kaepernick's sacrifice. This is what he had to say. He said, quote, Name the thing he sacrificed. He was benched before he protested. He's become far more celebrated and famous than his performance would justify. Now that he's got a lucrative ad contract, Ali sacrificed something Kaepernick didn't. Now, this comment is very important because it demonstrates to you exactly what conservatives have done through American history. They will, first of all, pit two black people against each other to try to make their point. But that's just the surface level. If you go one level deeper, they are always willing to lift up somebody after they're dead as the paragon of the way, as the quintessential example of how you should do it or how you should protest. Oh, you should do it like Dr. King did it. Well, we would see how Dr. King would do it today if you all didn't kill him. And it speaks to the whitewashing of their relationship, conservatives' relationship with people who protest power. They are always willing to say, oh, yeah, we definitely would have done it, like Ali. Ali really sacrificed something. But how many people actually think that Ben Shapiro would be on the side of a radical black Muslim, a radical black man who was Muslim, a part of the Nation of Islam? Ben Shapiro is lifting up Ali just to sandbag Colin Kaepernick, when in reality, he would not have been on either side. He hated them just the same. So it's just a standard ploy by conservatives to pit black people against each other, to pit revolutionaries against each other, to pit progressives against each other, knowing full well that there's no iteration of protest that any of us can do. I don't care if you're black, if you're white, if you're protesting political power, then there's no way that you could protest and have it approved by those people in power. Power will never approve of your protest. It doesn't matter if you kneel. It doesn't matter if you sit quietly in a sit-in. It doesn't matter if you are quiet in class and silent and refuse to speak. It doesn't matter if you're marching in the streets. It doesn't matter if you're standing in front of a building. There's no way that you can protest that will ever be approved of by this system. And no matter how they like to throw people from the past into the mix to say, oh, this is how Dr. King would do it, or this is how Muhammad Ali would do it, the fact of the matter is that they would have opposed them during their time the same way they oppose Colin Kaepernick right now.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. As you can tell by the sound of my voice or by the face that you see on the screen that I am not David Pakman. David is away on a trip, vacation. I'm not quite sure. He just asked me to fill in for him while he was gone, and I'm more than happy to. I'm Benjamin Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Show. You can find all of my content, all of my blogs and articles, all of my videos at thebenjamindixonshow.com. And you can also register for my newsletter, To the Point. To the Point is where I use 3 bullet points to not only summarize, but give you insight into the most pressing issues of the day. Now, let's get to the point on this next story. Steve Bannon was invited to an event and then subsequently disinvited because of the backlash. The NewYorker.com was, the magazine was planning an event coming up in the next few weeks in which Steve Bannon was supposed to be the headliner in the political section, in which he was supposed to have a confrontational interview with the editor of the magazine. That didn't bode well with other people who were invited to the conference. This is a quote from the New York Times. This is what they had to say, quote, "Within 30 minutes of one another, John Mulaney, Judd Apatow, Jack Antonoff, and Jim Carrey said on social media that they would be pulling out of scheduled events at the festival, right around the same time when Mr. Remnick, who's the editor, announced the cancellation of Mr. Bannon's participation. Patton Oswalt did the same thing." Now, for the record, I'm quite sure I muddled their names. Some of them, I don't even know who they are, but apparently they're big stars. That's fine. But Patton Oswalt had to say this on Twitter. He said, "I'm out. Sorry, New Yorker. See if Milo Yiannopoulos is free." I think that was excellent way to put it, because this is the same exact category that Steve Bannon is in. Steve Bannon helped launch Milo Yiannopoulos into the national conversation. And so that tweet makes absolute sense. Judd Apatow, whose name, again, I know I'm muddling, but it doesn't matter. Here's what they had to say. They said this on Twitter. If Steve Bannon is at the New Yorker Festival, I am out. I will not take part in an event that normalizes hate. I hope the New Yorker will do the right thing and cancels the Steve Bannon event. Maybe they should read their own reporting about his ideology. And one more, Jim Carrey. I'm sure I got that one right. This is what he had to say. He said, quote, Bannon and me on the same program could never happen. And so after all of this, all the negative publicity, all of the speakers who were counseling, the New Yorker decided to rescind their invitation to Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon, of course, did not take it lightly. This is what he had to say in a statement to the New York Times. He said the following, quote, the reason for my acceptance was simple. I would be facing one of the most fearless journalists of his generation. In what I would call a defining moment, David Remnick showed he was gutless when confronted by the howling online mob. Steve Bannon. You know, there's a lot to say about this, because this treads on the conversation of deplatforming Nazis, deplatforming white supremacists and other groups. And it intersects in that disagreement that we have on the left about free speech absolutism. And of course, this is not a free speech confrontation or conflict. Rather, this is an organization saying, oh, we made a mistake on inviting a jerk to our platform, so we're not going to invite him anymore. But it will be cast by some as a free speech problem. But here's a question underneath. At what point have we had enough hearing the same hateful rhetoric? It's not as though challenging them is sufficient. They want these platforms. They have mastered the art of participating in debates with the most disingenuous motives possible. They don't operate in good faith. They will revise history. They will just outright lie, and they will do it all for applause points. And no matter how it plays out, no matter how they're confronted with the truth, they will simply deny the truth, and it will get published online as Steve Bannon owns liberal media. I mean, this is their formula. They have no intention in engaging in good faith discussions. This is a part of their strategy. They deny everything that they've said, even though they've said it. They revise history, even though most of us understand history pretty clearly. They will look us in the face and deny it. And they will stand on stage while they're getting booed about lying and continue to lie, because they know this. They don't have to win the debate with anyone else except their audience. And so long as their audience continues to support them, they will never engage in a good faith argument. It is all performative. So it makes absolutely no sense to engage in these debates with them by giving them a platform that amplifies them. If you want to go to their turf and you want to tackle them on their turf, on their platforms that they built, fine, so be it. But to amplify them and to normalize them in mainstream media outlets suggests that there's something of value that can come from this, and there never is. There's never anything of value that can come from people who will look you in the eye and say things like Adolf Hitler was actually a socialist liberal. I mean, this is the type of revisionist history that they are engaging in. Steve Bannon has demonstrated that he has no redeeming values about him that are worthy to be on the national stage. And yet we have media outlets who are fascinated. They're still fascinated with this Trump phenomenon, for one, but then for two, they are interested in how many tickets they can sell by bringing on someone as controversial as Steve Bannon. This time it backfired on them, and good on all of the other people, all the stars and people who rejected this and said, I'm not going to be a part of this. because it is its own form of exploitation. You're putting me on stage with someone who is a known bigot for what? The chance to show him up and to show that he's disingenuous, or to show that doesn't matter. I mean, we're literally, the people whose minds have to be convinced that Donald Trump is a maniac who needs to be stopped, or the people whose minds need to be convinced of the fact that racism is running amok in this country, they're not going to change their minds. Their minds have been made up. Donald Trump said this during the campaign, and it bodes truthful today that he could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and people will still support him. You know why? Because they have reduced this down to nothing more than how they can own the libs. And they will revise history. They will lie directly to your face. They will be disingenuous in their debates, also so that they can own the libs. And so it makes absolutely no sense to amplify the message of someone like Steve Bannon on a mainstream platform like The New Yorker for the hopes of what? Because whatever you're hoping you're going to accomplish with them, you won't accomplish. So for anyone who's still saying that the president of the United States, Donald Trump, is draining the swamp, this story is for you. Rudy Giuliani told the New Yorker magazine in an interview that the president is prepared to suppress any of the results that they find in the Mueller probe. I mean, let me give you more details. According to the New Yorker, he said this, quote, the reporter said, quote, "I asked Giuliani if he thought the White House would raise objections," wrote Tobin in the profile. And this is what Giuliani said. He said, "I'm sure we will," Giuliani responded, noting that it would be the president who would make the final call. This is a technique that Donald Trump and his administration has mastered. Sadly to say, they understand that we are in such a stage of chaos when it comes to the sitting president and his many, many different controversies, that they can literally put out in advance their plan to suppress the findings of the Mueller probe, which in any other administration would be a scandal big enough to end that administration. But because we're dealing with a person with so much slime on them that it seems that nothing can stick, that they feel so free and so cavalier to just put out there to say, oh, we're not going, we have the option of suppressing the findings. Now, this is true. It's not inaccurate, but it is unethical. Vox.com was doing some reporting on this. And the fact of the matter is that Mueller honestly only has one legal obligation, and that is to submit his findings to Rod Rosenstein. What happens after that is that the president does have the ability to say whether or not he wants those findings to come out. But let's think about this. This is an investigation into the president of the United States and possible collusion with Russia. And so the president, using his executive powers to suppress the findings from that, which would prevent him from being potentially impeached, has a significant ramifications in terms of ethics, in terms of morality, which we understand the president of the United States is not concerned with whatsoever. But the fact remains is that this is setting a precedent that is going to have to be addressed. This is not something that can continue without it being addressed, but he has the benefit. The president of the United States has the benefit of Republicans who have demonstrated that they will walk in lockstep with the president of the United States no matter what he does. And so long as they are in power, the president really cannot be held accountable. The majority of what's happening are only things that could be addressed through impeachment. And so long as the president of the United States has a majority in his party, he can feel free to do whatever he wants without the fear of impeachment because they are in power. That being the case, that lets you know how important the midterms are, if for no other reason but a check on presidential power. And it's astonishing to me. Not really, but it is, that people, conservatives, who are always talking about the overreach of presidential power, we are living in one of the most extreme examples of presidential overreach, and yet they're saying nothing. So even if this incoming Congress does not impeach the president, which they should, the fact of the matter is they will be there as a counterbalance to hold him accountable and rein in his power run amok. And that's why the midterms are so important.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I am Benjamin Dixon filling in for David. David is away and we'll be back soon. You have me for the rest of the week. So if you're enjoying yourself so far, that's great news. If you're not enjoying yourself, I don't know why you wouldn't be. But if you're not enjoying yourself, David will be back sooner than you realize. Let's jump into some more news. We do a lot of coverage of the president of the United States because he is the president of the United States, and the things that he says and does have far-reaching implications. Yesterday on Labor Day, while the rest of us were taking some time off to rest from our labor, this is what the president of the United States said on Twitter. He said, quote, "Two long-running Obama-era investigations of two very popular Republican congressmen were brought to a well-publicized charge just ahead of the midterms by Jeff Sessions, Justice Department. Two easy wins now in doubt because there is not enough time. Good job, Jeff." I don't think I have to explain to you why this is so problematic, but just in case someone is wondering what the big deal about this is that Donald Trump is implying here that Jeff Sessions should suppress an FBI investigation into two sitting Congress people and do so for political purposes. I mean, this is unethical. And in fact, this may very well be its own version of obstruction of justice, where the president of the United States could have implicated himself yet again in a crime that is impeachable if there was a Congress that would be willing to hold him accountable. But because there's no Congress willing to hold him accountable, Donald Trump is likely to get away with this. And because we become so accustomed to the president of the United States doing obscenely ridiculous things on a regular basis, it's going to filter through our news cycle without really moving the dial in terms of public opinion. There's not going to be a bump down or up or otherwise when it comes to Donald Trump, because we have become accustomed to his madness, to his complete lack of regard for societal norms, presidential norms, any type of decorum. He is a maniac, and he has been unleashed on the United States. And part of the damage is that we have gotten used to it. But just so that you know, the people who are involved with this, Chris Collins, congressman, he has been indicted on 13 counts of security fraud, including wire fraud and making false statements to the FBI. Then you also have, on the other hand, you have Duncan Hunter, who has a well-publicized case, not because Jeff Sessions decided to pursue it, but because of what he spent campaign money on, and then how he got on television and tried to blame it on his wife. That's why that became so well publicized, in addition to the fact that he allegedly committed these crimes. But just take a look at some of these things, or take a listen to some of the things that he spent money on. Family vacations to Italy, Hawaii, and Las Vegas into the tens of thousands of dollars. Personal items from Costco, $11,300. Personal items from Walmart, almost $6,000 in Walmart. And then he spent $2,000 to send a family member to a Steelers game. I mean, This is the type of corruption that Donald Trump convinced his followers that he was going to get rid of. And yet now on this side of it, he's lamenting because his administration is actually doing what they said they were going to do. Little did he know that it was going to hit people who supported him early on. Chris Collins was the first sitting congressman to endorse Donald Trump. Who knew that a crook would endorse a crook? I'm sorry, I wasn't planning on saying that, but it just came out like that. But it's the truth. I want to read this quote from CNN on your screen now. Quote, a decision by the Justice Department to hold off on prosecuting 2 Republican congressmen up for re-election in order to help them win would have been highly unethical and a blatantly politically motivated violation of the department's nonpartisan mission. So in this case, Jeff Sessions is actually just doing his job. And don't get me wrong, this is not going to make Jeff Sessions some type of hero. Neither should he ever become one, because he has a standing reputation and, quite frankly, is a Klansman, Keebler Elfsman, a Keebler Elf Klansman, however you want to say it. He is problematic and does not need to be championed or lifted up as a hero for simply doing the right thing in this case. But usually, you know, what I always say, whenever you see 2 monsters fighting each other, you sit back and let them fight. Here's a tweet from former Attorney General Eric Holder, and this is what he had to say on Twitter. He said, quote, "This is so dangerous and stupid, it's mind-boggling. This is a fundamental threat to the rule of law." And here's a tweet from former Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, who was fired by Trump. This is what she had to say. "Repeatedly trying to pervert DOJ into a weapon to go after his adversaries, and now shamelessly complaining that the DOJ should protect his political allies to maintain his majority in the midterms is nothing short of an all-out assault on the rule of law." And I can't reiterate this enough. This is coming from the highest reigns of power in our country. There is no greater threat to our democracy right now than a president who is looking at the Department of Justice as his own political tool that he could use to prosecute his enemies and to protect his allies. There is nothing else happening in this country right now that is a unique change from the past administration that is as damning and devastating as what Donald Trump is trying to morph his Department of Justice into. And this is not to make Jeff Sessions a hero. Again, he's not a hero. He's clearly not a hero. But in this case, he's simply doing his job and seems to be doing it pretty correctly so far. But I'm really loath to give him too much credit, because it won't be long before he uses the Department of Justice to attack his enemies, to attack his adversaries. So this is something that we have to keep our eye on, because the president doing this little by little in the public space makes us more comfortable with it. Whether we are used to it, we may never be comfortable with it, but we have become accustomed to it. And so it's not even alarming anymore that the president of the United States does something like this, when in any past administration, this would be the end of that presidency. Again, the best way I can describe it is that Donald Trump has mastered the art of having so much slime on him that nothing sticks. And we, as a collective consciousness, as a collective body politic, have not figured out quite how we are going to deal with a person who has absolutely no shame and does not seem to be able to be held accountable for anything that he does. You know, for a guy who campaigned on spending all of his time in the White House, and for a guy who constantly attacked President Obama for taking a few days vacationing, Donald Trump, this is going to shock you, Donald Trump is a hypocrite. Multiple outlets are reporting on this new information, including the Washington Post, the CNN, New York Times, but particularly Newsweek. They are reporting that Trump has spent 25% of his presidency at a Trump golf course. Now, I have to repeat that for dramatic effect, because it is absurd. Donald Trump has spent 25% of his presidency at a Trump golf course. That's right. So 150 days of Donald Trump's 582 days thus far in office have been spent at his own golf course. Now, obviously, two facets of this. Number one, the laziness of Donald Trump, right? But then also how he is taking America to the bank. Mar-a-Lago, you would recall that as soon as he became president, it doubled its membership fees from $100,000 for a member to $200,000 for a member. And now Donald Trump is spending an obscene amount of time across his properties. But we'll get to the amount of money that he's spending in a minute. I want to read this from Newsweek. This is what they had to say about it. Quote, Trump often ridiculed former President Barack Obama for the number of days he spent on the golf course. At the same point in his presidency, Obama had golfed 44 times. At this pace, the president, Donald Trump, will spend roughly 322 days on the golf course in a 4-year term, vastly exceeding the 306 days President Obama spent golfing during 8 years in the Oval Office. And yet Donald Trump gets a pass for this. Donald Trump gets a pass for everything. Donald Trump, I mean, when you this is the strength. I have a lot more to talk about this particular story, but I have to drop this here. This is the strength of your supporters not caring, right? This is a horrible thing. But if you think about it in terms of what we do on the left, it's a bad thing. On the right, they don't care what Donald Trump does. It doesn't matter. He will always be able to get away with these things. He will never be held accountable by his own. Versus on the left, we hold our own accountable. I mean, you take a look at the people who have Al Franken, who had to resign because of the Me Too movement. That wasn't pushed by Republicans. His resignation was pushed by Democrats because we're holding our own accountable. This is the moral thing to do. It is the right thing to do. But when you are willing to hold your side accountable and the other side doesn't care if the president shoots someone on Fifth Avenue, then we have an asymmetrical fight where they have the political advantage because no matter what that person does, they will never be held accountable. And while on our side, we're holding ourselves accountable in addition to the disingenuousness and the hypocrisy of the right trying to hold us accountable. I just had to drop that in there because of how obscene this state of American politics really is. So here's some tweets from Donald Trump that should remind you of just how hypocritical he is, as if you needed reminding. This is what he said back when Obama was in office. He said, "Can you believe that with all of the problems and difficulties facing the U.S. president, Obama spent the day playing golf? Worse than Carter." I mean, really, really horrible for the president to take a day and play golf. Donald Trump was ready to crucify him, or if I were a little edgy, I would say lynch him. But I digress. Here is another tweet from Donald Trump. He said, Obama has admitted that he spends his mornings watching ESPN. Then he plays golf, fundraises, and grants amnesty to illegals. I mean, this is patently not true. However, but this is how they operate. So there's no utility whatsoever to point out that they're lying because they know they're lying, and that's a part of their calculus. But this is what we're up against. The president who ran on this, the president who attacked Barack Obama about this all the time, is doing way worse. I mean, multiple times, more time spent on the golf course than President Obama, and nobody has anything to say. And this is what he said recently. He said, I have arrived on Twitter. He said, quote, I have arrived in Scotland and will be at Trump Turnberry for 2 days of meetings, calls, and hopefully get some golf. My primary form of exercise. The weather is beautiful and the place is incredible. Tomorrow I go to Helsinki for a Monday meeting with Vladimir Putin. So he clearly has made it known that he has no shame whatsoever about what he is doing with America's time and money. And just to put this in context of how much Donald Trump is spending, all of the complaints that Donald Trump, and these are reports that people have made previously, I mean, over the last couple of months, all of the complaints that Donald Trump has had about the cost of the Mueller probe. The fact of the matter is that Donald Trump has spent more traveling to his golf courses than Bob Mueller has spent on the entire probe thus far. This, according to the Washington Post, quote, the conservative group Judicial Watch, which calculated similar figures for Obama's presidency, told the Associated Press that it figured each trip to Mar-a-Lago cost about $1 million, including only Air Force One travel and Secret Service protection. This is including only two subsets of the cost incurred by the federal government. It doesn't include, Judicial Watch told the AP, things like airlifting equipment such as presidential limousines, nor does it include all the cost of protection. In July of last year, the Washington Post determined that the Coast Guard spent about $6.6 million on guarding the beachfront adjacent property over the course of Trump's first 5 visits there. If the other visits were similarly expensive, the overall price tag essentially doubles. So this is what the president is doing with his time, and this is what the president is doing with his money, and no one cares. No one in power cares. Not a single Republican who's concerned about the deficit, not a single conservative who will turn around in any other administration talk about fiscal responsibility. None of that matters. You know why? Because they are playing a game, and the game that they are playing is to hold us accountable on the left for every single detail while they absolve the president, the sitting president of the United States, of any responsibility to fiscal responsibility, any responsibility to ethics, any responsibility whatsoever.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I am, of course, Benjamin Dixon, filling in for David. As we speak, the confirmation hearings into Brett Kavanaugh, Donald Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court, they are going on. And from what we can tell during this recording is that the Democrats are protesting. They have a coordinated protest effort to bring attention to the fact that there are tens of thousands of documents that the Republicans are stopping from coming out. And these documents are focused particularly during his time, Kavanaugh's time in the Bush administration during the Iraq War. 42,000 documents were dropped on Democrats last night, the night before the hearing today. And so Democrats are protesting. We'll give you a full breakdown of that on tomorrow's episode. But just to be clear about, number one, who Kavanaugh is, he is an extremist. He is being appointed to the Supreme Court in order to overturn Roe versus Wade. He is also being appointed to the Supreme Court because of how he views presidential power and how he is willing to extend more power to President Trump, particularly in this Mueller probe and the investigation surrounding it. And so he is a dangerous figure who really is probably going to be confirmed if Democrats cannot convince someone like Susan Collins to vote against him. And that's the problem. That's the problem here. Democrats have found themselves in a position where there's not really much that they can do except to try to convince someone on the other side of the aisle that they should withhold their vote. And this puts us in a really bad position for almost the next 30 years, however old, however long Kavanaugh would serve on the bench. I mean, almost for the rest of our lives. And this is why I really look at anyone who thinks, especially people from the left, who thinks that the right move or it wasn't so bad that Trump got into office. People who are literally using their platforms, very large platforms, very well-known platforms by some other people that I won't mention on David's show. But if you want to know the details, come to my show and I'll call out names. People with these large platforms on YouTube who are saying that this is not a big deal, that we can, that Trump is going to start the revolution. He's going to force everyone to become more progressive. That's not happening. what's happening is that Donald Trump is making appointments up and down the judiciary that are going to outlast our lifetimes. And because of that, the Democrats, when they get back into power, they really only have one route. They only have one option, and that is to play hardball. They're going to need to do something like to stack the courts just to offset what Donald Trump is doing in this period that is so extreme that many other Republican administrations would not have done it in terms of their political appointments. So here we are. I mean, and again, hang on. I want to make sure that you're not that you don't misconstrue what I'm saying, that any other previous Republican administration was more moderate, because they were not. It's simply that we're in such a hyper partisan time right now that a person and a character like Donald Trump knows how much he can exploit it without any ramifications. Of course, I think Republicans would have tried to put someone who would overturn Roe versus Wade on the bench, except for the type of backlash that they would have been presented with, not only from Democrats, but from the public in general. But we've come to a point in politics today that that's no longer the case. And because we're in this hyper-partisan era where Republicans are running up the scoreboard with extremists, conservative extremists who are trying to rewrite American history, who are trying to undo the last 100 years. They want to undo the entire 20th century so that they can take us back to the Gilded Age, which economically speaking, we are literally already there in terms of levels of inequality. But I digress. The point is this, is that if there's no one to hold these people accountable, they will continue to appoint more and more extreme conservatives to the bench and to get them elected into power. And it makes absolutely no sense for Democrats going forward to try to triangulate and play nice with these people, because they are playing for keeps. I say this all the time, and I'm going to keep saying it. You cannot be reasonable with unreasonable people. You cannot be reasonable at unreasonable times. And we are most certainly dealing with a very disingenuous group of Republicans who have absolutely no intention in engaging in good faith, who will literally get on television and look you dead in the eye and lie to you, who will rewrite history for their political ends, for their political gain. And we have Democrats who are still thinking that we can negotiate with them. You don't negotiate with political terrorists. You don't negotiate with people who would just as soon rather die than to let Obamacare stand, for example. And the reason I bring that up is because, as we all well know, Obamacare is a conservative idea. It comes from the Heritage Foundation, first tested in Massachusetts by Mitt Romney. And I bring that up in context of this to demonstrate just how disingenuous conservatives are. If they were true about what they really believed, then they would have gotten behind President Obama, because he got behind one of their ideas. But that is not what they are here for. They are here for nothing else but pure political partisanship and sportsmanship. This is a game to them. They want nothing else but to maintain political power at all costs. And if that means betraying what they believe, they have no problem with it whatsoever. You cannot be reasonable with unreasonable people at unreasonable times. And so Democrats, once they get back in power, are going to have to play hardball. And anyone who is talking about, working with Republicans and reaching across the aisles, absolutely should not be running, should not get past the primary, because we don't have time for that when we're dealing with people who would just as soon see the world burn than to give anyone who's not conservative, because I don't want to mistake and say just Democrats, but they would rather see the world burn to give anyone who's not a conservative an opportunity to do something constructive. That is how unreasonable these times are. And if we don't understand the score, we are always going to be losing. Apparently in the United States of America, people who work, quote unquote, regular jobs are something to be shamed, especially when you have come from being a star, even if it's only a relative star, to finding yourself having to work at a grocery store. This is what happened with Jeffrey Owens, former star of the hit TV series The Cosby Show. Now, I mean, you have to put this in perspective. The Cosby Show was back in the 80s. I was a little boy when The Cosby Show came on. Elvin Thibodeau was a character on that show, and that show ended somewhere in the 90s. So, I mean, I guess people have in their mind this expectation that you make enough money as a TV star, as a secondary actor on a TV show, that it wouldn't warrant you needing to get a regular job. Well, apparently, and we'll pull up the image on the screen. What you see on your screen now is an image of Jeffrey Owens working at Trader Joe's. And he looks like a guy, he looks like a regular guy going through regular life. I mean, this is, if you catch any of us on a regular day, this is how we look. And this is how we go through these periods in our life where we have to get a job. I mean, when has it ever been an issue for someone to have a job? Well, apparently, Fox News thought this was newsworthy, and the Daily Mail, which is a rag of a magazine, of a website rather, which we could say the same thing about Fox News, they promoted this story and it went viral, and so many people had a lot to say about it, but most specifically, the actor himself got wind of it, and he felt the embarrassment because of it. I want to play a clip from Jeffrey Owens, Elvin Thibodeau from the Cosby Show on Good Morning America just this morning.
I mean, I was really devastated, but it lasted. It was the period of devastation was so short because so shortly after that, the responses. My wife and I started to read these responses from like literally all over the world of support, and so fortunately, the shame part didn't last very long. It hurt, but then it's amazing.
I mean, there he is. He said that he was devastated because of this, and it was only because of the outpouring of love from everybody else that he was able to not stay devastated. But listen to this quote from the Daily Mail. This is what they thought was newsworthy. They said, quote, "The actor who played Elvin in the show, The Cosby Show, is now working as a cashier at Trader Joe's," photos reveal. A shopper spotted Jeffrey Owens, who was 57, behind a till at the store in Clifton, New Jersey, where staff earn around $11 an hour. See, the problem here is that the only way this is news is if you think there is something wrong with the person who was once on television having to work a quote unquote regular job like the rest of us Joe Schmoes. You know, that's the only way that this is news. And because that's the only way this is news, this is your attempt to generate clicks based on shaming somebody for earning a quote unquote honest day's living. Now, you know, the socialist side of me says that this guy, nobody in the country who's 60 years old, basically should have to work 9-10 hours a day, making $11 an hour just so that they can live. But I'll set that aside for the David Pakman Show, and I'll just talk about the regular conversation about when is it ever a bad thing for people to earn an honest living? And, you know, it just speaks to the lack of integrity in media outlets, particularly Fox News, which is not shocking, but it has to be pointed out. They are willing to defame anybody and betray their own ideas and notions of a quote unquote honest day's work. They're forever telling people, oh, just go out and get a job and you need to do this, you need to do that. And here's someone doing that exact thing. And Fox News chooses to use this as an opportunity to shame him and get clicks off of it because of it. The story itself may have a good ending. Tyler Perry, who, for those of you who don't know Tyler Perry, he's the director, writer, and actor behind the Medea series. I'm not a huge fan, but that's neither here nor there. I really appreciate what he did this morning. He tweeted on Twitter, he said, quote, "Jeffrey Owens, I'm about to start shooting OWN's #1 drama next week. Come join us. I have so much respect for people who hustle between gigs, the measure of a true artist." And I mean, so good on Tyler Perry for doing that, man. That is a huge thing. And I hope that this works out good for Jeffrey Owens. I hope that this sets him up for the rest of his life so he doesn't have to be working on his feet at 60 years old, earning any amount of money. He can just sit back and live on the money that he's getting ready to make with Tyler Perry. But for the rest of us, I mean, all of us are in this kind of situation from time to time. All of us have to go and get jobs in between trying to work our big ideas and trying to work our hustle and whatever the case may be. And this should just let you know that in this terms of elitism, that snobby elitism that Fox News tries to deride all the time and leftists, we get it directly from them on a national level, trying to shame somebody who is making a quote unquote honest day's living. I want to share one more example of the media trying to shame an actor, a former actor. This is a clip from TMZ back from 2011 when they caught the former actor from the hit show that I still love, Martin, working selling used cars.
So what's he up to now? Movies, Broadway, infomercials?
He is now working as a car salesman.
No. Yes. You from acting on Martin to selling cars, man. Tell us, how is that going?
It's going wonderful. It's going wonderful.
He said it started out to research a role.
You know, and then I just kind of kept doing it. You know, I like it. I got a family, man. You know what I'm saying? And there's no shame in taking care of your family.
There's no shame in taking care of your family. So, you know, I mean, all these people, I know this is David's program and you know, it's broadcast on radio, so I'm going to limit my profanity. But all these people, you know, shaming folks like this, you know, you go to hell, man, because the reality of it is that this is the existence. This is how most Americans live, period. Most Americans live where they're having to work, make ends meet, living paycheck to paycheck just so that they can support their families. I mean, more people than you realize. A lot of people don't like to talk about living paycheck to paycheck. They don't want to have to talk about living in poverty because they're ashamed of it, because the society does exactly this. If you're not rich, if you're not successful, then they look down on you. In reality, the majority of us are not rich. We're not successful. We're just out here hustling like these two guys who were shamed by media.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.